And hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Obama's terror strategy under fire this week as ISIS militants grow more bold in their attacks in the Middle East. And with new threats on the rise across the globe here at home, the feud over the president's executive action on immigration is holding up a bill in Congress that would keep the Department of Homeland Security funded past next Friday, the 27th. Joining us now to discuss all of this is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson. Mr. Secretary, welcome back. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, John.
Let's talk about terrorism, ISIS, ISIL, your acronym for it, and the president's approach to this. He has been criticized from a number of different fronts for not calling this a battle against Islamic extremism. Why won't he acknowledge that we are fighting Islamic extremism?
Well, first of all, from my perspective, whether it's referred to as Islamic extremism or violent extremism, what it comes down to is ISIL is a terrorist organization that represents a serious potential threat to our homeland, which has to be addressed militarily and through a whole-of-government approach, which is why Homeland Security these days is so important. Law enforcement here in this country, our countering violent extremism efforts in this country. We had a summit about that this week. So it is a dangerous terrorist organization that has to be dealt with.
But
from my perspective,
is this not a religious ideology?
Well, let me say this. In our engagements around the country, I do a lot of these myself in Muslim communities, Islamic cultural centers, in places like Minneapolis, Boston, LA, Chicago, Columbus, Ohio. The thing I hear from leaders in the Muslim community in this country is ISIL is attempting to hijack my religion. Our religion is about peace and brotherhood, and ISIL is attempting to hijack that from us, and they resent that. Most victims of ISIL are, in fact, Muslims. So it seems to me that to refer to ISIL as occupying any part of the Islamic theology is playing on a battlefield that they would like us to be on. I think that to call them some form of Islam gives the group more dignity than it deserves, frankly.
So this
it is a terrorist organization.
So this then is not an exercise in being politically correct here at home. This is an exercise in not giving them the legitimacy that they seek?
Well, that's what I'm hearing from the Muslim community in this country. But more importantly, ISIL is a dangerous terrorist organization that has to be dealt with. They've got some 30,000 fighters on the ground in Iraq and Syria. They have very effective use of the internet, social media. They have the capability to reach into our homeland, to recruit and inspire independent actors here, potentially. And so we've got to deal with this in a whole-of-government approach.
There are members.
I'm more concerned about that, frankly, than I am what two words we use to refer to them.
But there are members of your own party who believe that the president is missing a big part of the picture here by not identifying ISIL or ISIS as Islamic extremist. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat from Hawaii, she is a veteran of the Iraq War, said this to us the other day about strategy.
Unless you accurately identify who your enemy is, then you can't come up with an effective strategy, a winning strategy to defeat that enemy.
So you might not call them Islamic extremists because you don't want to give them, as you said, the dignity of being part of the Islamic faith. But if you don't identify them as a radical terrorist religious ideology, can you adequately address the threat and develop a winning strategy?
Look, ISIL is what it is. It is a terrorist organization that kills Americans.
But they want to become a state.
They want to become a state, and they want to become an Islamic state. And to call them Islamic, to call them any form of Islamic, gives them too much dignity, in my view, and in the view of a lot of Muslims around the world.
The president has, on occasion, Mr. Secretary, seemed to draw a moral equivalence between what ISIS is doing in the 21st century and what Christians did 1,000 years ago when they were fighting Muslim armies. What's the relevance of making that comparison?
Well, look, again, from my Homeland Security perspective, we've got to deal with this terrorist organization, which is the most prominent on the world stage right now, which is one of the reasons, frankly, why the Department of Homeland Security needs a budget by the end of this week. I hope you're going to ask me about that.
We'll talk about that.
But it is a terrorist organization that is very dangerous. It's on the march, it's on the move, and it is very effective in its use of the internet for recruitment purposes. Again, to say that they are in any form Islamic I believe, cedes to them a playing field that they would like us to be drawn onto.
At the summit that you had at the White House, which you attended, there was a lot of talk about social media, a lot of talk about community sensitivity. Marie Harf, State Department spokeswoman, was roundly criticized for saying at the beginning of the week, quote, "We can't kill our way out of this war. We need to go after the root causes that lead people to join these groups, lack of opportunity and jobs among them." Here's what the Navy SEAL who shot Osama bin Laden had to say about that.
They get paid to cut off heads, to crucify children, to sell slaves, and to cut off heads. And I don't think that, a change in career path is what's going to stop them.
So again, this is a terrorist organization that wants to become a state. How would jobs, how would community outreach possibly deter them from doing what they want to do? Maybe you might stop a few people from the United States going over and joining them, but how does that address the real problem?
This way, John. We need to respond to this terrorist organization militarily in an international coalition, and we're doing that. But because of the foreign fighter phenomenon, the number of foreign fighters they have in their force, and because of their use of the internet, their use of social media to recruit for specific terrorist attacks, we need to be involved in the relevant communities in this country to thwart their recruitment efforts and to help build the counter-narrative to the one that is being put out by ISIL right now. I view that as critically important given the phase to which we have evolved in our counterterrorism efforts. It does involve a whole-of-government approach, which does involve engagement in the community, building trust so that the communities through which there is the capacity to deter those who want to go to these groups, have a level of trust with state, local, and federal law enforcement, and we support their efforts to build a counter-narrative. I think that's critical.
Let's move on and talk about your budget and immigration. The Justice Department said that it's going to appeal U.S. District Judge in Texas's Andrew Hanen's ruling on the immigration executive action. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals should uphold Judge Hanen's ruling because in cases like this, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals or any Court of Appeals tends to preserve the status quo. And the status quo was not having this immigration executive action in place. What do you say?
We will appeal. This is what appellate courts are for. We will seek a stay of Judge Hanen's injunction. Looking at it from my common sense perspective, the judge in his opinion, and I read all 123 pages of it, said he has no quarrel with the notion that we are allowed to prioritize how we use our resources to deport people in this country. And we are prioritizing. We're prioritizing on convicted criminals. We are prioritizing on building border security, deporting those who are recent arrivals who are apprehended at the border. But there's a large segment of the undocumented population in this country who've been here for years, who are not going to be deported in any administration, Democratic or Republican. That's the reality.
But why not Congress
hold on. So from my Homeland Security law enforcement perspective, it is better to find ways to encourage that group of people to come forward, come out of the shadows, get on the books, be accountable, receive a work authorization, and pay taxes. And what the judge's opinion does is it says you can prioritize, and I don't quarrel with your leaving these people alone because they're not priorities, they're not criminals, and they've been here for years, but effectively I can't bring them out of the shadows. They have to stay in the shadows. And from the law enforcement perspective, from the perspective of the sheriff, the chief, the commissioner in cities and counties around the country, that's not a good thing. And so we are going to appeal, and we're going to seek a stay of this, and we welcome the debate in Congress about immigration reform. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to have it.
All of this is tied to your budget, which runs out on February the 27th. Why are Democrats blocking debate in the Senate on the Senate bill?
Well, Democrats are not blocking debate.
They are.
What is happening is that some in Congress
they're filibustering to block debate.
Hold on. What is happening is that some in Congress want to tie defunding our executive actions to my entire Homeland Security budget.
Yeah, understood. But why can't Democrats just introduce an amendment to strip that part from the bill and undertake at least debate in the Senate as opposed to stonewalling?
We should have the debate about immigration reform, but you should not tie that to the funding for the third largest department of our government, 240,000 people, which includes, by the way, efforts to do all the things we've been talking about on the counterterrorism front, the Coast Guard, FEMA, in the midst of a very harsh winter. That funding for FEMA, the Coast Guard, the Secret Service, our Border Patrol agents, our customs agents, our cybersecurity efforts all runs out at the end of this week. And so what I've been continually saying to Congress, to the public, and to the press is that we need a fully funded Department of Homeland Security. We need a clean appropriations bill for our department.
And I think a lot of people understand the importance of that. But is the president partly at fault here? Because it was his executive action. Rather than letting Congress handle this, he went ahead and he passed this executive action. Why not pull that off the table and let Congress handle the immigration part?
The president has said repeatedly, including on the day we announced our executive actions, that he would like to have the immigration debate with Congress. Unfortunately, that has not happened. We have waited for years, literally, for Congress to get to the business of immigration reform. The Senate passed a good bill, the House has not. Now what is going on in Congress is there are some who want to defund our executive actions and do it in a way that holds up the entire budget of Homeland Security for this nation. That is unacceptable from a public safety, Homeland Security view, and I'm talking to my friends on the Hill, Democrat and Republican, about the importance of let's get on with funding the Department of Homeland Security.
Clearly this is going to be a very important story. We'll continue to watch in the days to come. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.